Hello again, this is Austin Wintory, this is the Game Maker's Notebook, and today something a little different. Rather than talking to a composer, I am speaking with the rather illustriously well-known actor Troy Baker, known for currently Death Stranding, The Last of Us Part 1 and 2, Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. The list goes literally infinitely on, and we have a conversation that runs an incredibly wide gamut. We talk a lot about process, we talk a lot about writing, acting, and above all, storytelling. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Shall we hit it?
I thought we were.
All right. Because we're rolling,
Yeah, man. That was the sound of friendship.
the mics hopefully heard our clinking.
The clinking of glasses. You know where that came from, right?
Tell me where the clinking tradition came from, and then I will intro
so good.
this. But we're going to keep this in there.
The etymology of the clinking of the glasses would be if we were making an accord, we would slam our drinks together as we were toasting so that my drink would go into yours, your drink would go into mine, so that if one of them was poisoned, then, hey, now we're both poisoned. This was a sign of trust. And then if you didn't drink immediately after, they would murder you. But to this day, we still...
Interesting.
Yeah, we don't drink with like bone horn goblets, so we're a little.
Well,
bit
no
more
one. You
delicate.
didn't have to ruin that. This is an audio only.
But they heard the clink. So
True. Fair enough.
That was
it's a glass framed bone gauntlet.
Do an intro. I want to see how you intro. I'm staring at you.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm here with that. That was the most Troy Baker intro possible.
Yeah.
So I feel like no more intro is required. But for the sake of due diligence and, officialness.
Ruin the mystery.
Yes, I am here with an actor. This is a major change of pace. You are my first time interviewing a non-composer.
Really?
And I want to say interviewing in quotes, as these are much more often this kind of thing. But in this case, with the Blantons.
You've never done the Blantons before?
No, that is not a composer mainstay. That is a Troy Wintory / Austin Baker.
Sure, it's covering all of our grounds. I'm surprised with the amount of musicians that you know that it's not. Is that not like a commonplace? Is that more writers that have to?
Well, at least while recording a podcast, I should say.
What are you doing?
Well, maybe we're going to start a new trend here.
Or
But I
just
don't
let it
know.
be. I'm fine with it being a one-off.
Yeah, it's okay. Either way, it will inform the conversation. That's going to be
100%.
the truth either
or at
way.
least influence it. Go ahead.
Without a doubt. So, I very often kind of start by just saying, let's sort of do some basics.
Okay.
In your case, I want to start with the present.
Okay.
I don't actually know when this is going to be published, but
The future.
we are speaking from the past.
Into the future about our present.
Yes, correct. And in the spirit of that, this week has seen the release of Death Stranding.
Yeah.
A remarkable indie made by a young auteur.
Can we call it that though? Can we call it an indie? It's a triple I. That's what Jack Attridge, our dear friend, coined that phrase. It's a triple I.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard double A and I've heard triple I, and I prefer of the two. Triple I seems
More pretentious.
yeah. Well, it feels
I get what
less.
you're saying.
It doesn't feel like a lower on the ladder. Double A feels like it's not as good as triple A, and then now someone's going to come along and make a quadruple A. So yes, I don't care one way or the other, but I think that anybody listening to this, and myself included, would love to unpack the experience, the Kojima experience, and your perspective on that. Because I'm particularly curious, because we're going to get into all kinds of other, noteworthy entries on your resume. But the thing that I'm most interested to hit you with is what about that made it distinct from anything else? Because I think with the mystique around Kojima, it seems impossible that there wouldn't have been things about it that are only true of it.
Okay.
Is that an accurate guess?
For sure.
So walk me through some of those.
The story of how I got involved in this is a series of taps on the shoulder. So
It sounds very Bridge of Spies or
right?
something.
That's where you insert the wavy lines, right? If this it all began. It literally all began with a tap on my shoulder at E3. Metal Gear, I guess 4 had just come out, and he was showing that
several
off
E3s ago.
Several E3s ago, and he was showing this off at E3, and then there was a picture. He was like, I want to show you. Do you want to see the behind closed doors?
What was going on in your career at that moment?
Not much. I mean, I think I guess
Were you there networking?
Yeah, I mean, I went to E3 a bunch just kind of as a fan before, but before you couldn't go to E3 unless you had some kind of industry credential. Right. So by the good graces of whomever, I was always there. Either I was stealing someone's badge, right, which, as we found out through Greg Miller, will get you banned, or now there's cosplayers at E3, and it's just the weirdest thing. But I went just because I wanted to, not necessarily network, because I don't think I was that savvy. I just wanted to experience. I wanted to learn more about this industry. I'm always been that guy.
But you had dipped your toe. You had done stuff.
Yeah. So I think when 4 came out, that was
what year would that have
been? If only there was a device.
I know.
I think
see how
at
well
that
you can
point,
look that up and not sound distracted.
I think I had done Metal Gear Solid 4. I'm speaking aloud to myself and absolutely not talking. Was 2008. No, was that right? Because I mean, what came after? Because it certainly wasn't 5. Because Phantom Pain wasn't out yet. Because it was 2. It was after. Man,
I'm willing to just embrace 2008.
Okay, sure. It had to have been Phantom Pain though, because I guess we had worked together at that point, because we didn't really do anything together on. I did something on Peace Walker, I think, or Sons of Liberty. I can't remember, but he taps me on the shoulder. He's like, "Do you want to check out the behind closed doors of this?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And so I went through there, and there's pictures that people took of us and stuff. And there was all these memes that came out. It was like, we got high or whatever backstage. We did not. Although that would have been a cool story too. That somehow we like smoked weed on the floor of
the
E3.
LA Convention Center.
Of the LA Convention Center. Staples. So we do that, and then I'm either at DICE or I'm at Keeley's show in Vegas. And I'm
back in those days, that would have been way before. Like the Game Awards, you mean?
Yeah. So
this would have way predated that, right?
Well, his Game Awards show, Keeley did his first show in Vegas, and then he moved it back to LA. But so it was either DICE or it was Keeley's show, but it may have been DICE.
It's that far along, because the Spike VGAs were still going at least as late as 2012 or 13.
Sure. But this was after that. So I get the first tap on the shoulder.
Oh, well, I'm apparently not following this story.
Let's say it's 2015. Let's say it's after Phantom Pain, and it just feels like so much longer ago than that. Phantom Pain had showed. He taps me on my shoulder in Vegas. I turn around, and it's Kojima and his producer at the time, Ken. And he was like, "You want to get a picture?" I was like, "Absolutely." So I do like the ocelot. You know, you're pretty good fingers. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it sounds really weird. Google it. It's fun. Don't do your pretty good fingers. Make sure you somehow give it a qualifier of like Ocelot or Metal Gear.
I suspect this audience will fully understand where you're coming from.
Just making sure, because that could lead you down like a serious dark rabbit hole on Google.
All Google entries can take you down. It can be the most innocent thing ever, and 1 hour later, you're a changed, traumatized person.
Lemon party. Oh my God.
Traumatized, or you've unearthed some things about yourself.
Yeah, about yourself.
You're
like, wow,
you were so
this is revelatory of me.
Yeah.
And so then he was like, "Hey, I have this." He goes, I have a role for you in my new game." I was like, "Okay." An actor always loves to hear that, but it also kind of like goes, "All right, we're going to file that back in I can't pay my rent or cash any checks off of that.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes, but we want you to be on our next game. I was like, any day of the week and twice on Sunday, I'll come to work for you. Because we had some really cool conversations on Fan and Pain, and we were outside when we were doing Fan and Pain, and at the time I smoked, and we went outside, and he wasn't smoking, but I was talking to his producer, and he goes, if you could reboot any horror franchise, what would you do? And I was like, reboot? I was like, oh man, I can speak from personal experience. I said, I think you could do a really good job of doing Silent Hill. And he goes, okay, who would you cast? And I was like, he goes, do you want like a no name, or do you want like a celebrity? He was like, let's say we're going to do a celebrity. I was like, honestly, dude, Norman Reedus right now is really, he's good, he's solid, he's down, and he's gonna explode soon. Like, he's big right now, but he's about to explode. He's like, who would you have directed? I was like, I've heard a podcast with Ken Levine and Guillermo del Toro, and if anybody from the film industry was going to direct a game, I'd do Guillermo del Toro. And he was like, we want to tell you about a thing called PT. And I was like, boom, 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 hit all the three of the things. I have no idea how I did, and of course that was, star-crossed and ill-fated, but
you shouldn't have said anything. You
right?
totally
I jinxed it. It was me. I have that power. So anyway, that's a weird sidebar, but that's the second tap on the shoulder was in Vegas. The third was at San Diego Comic-Con.
So it's been years of
this has been like years of tapping on shoulders. It was like 2015, 2016. And then I think it was 2017, July of 2017. There's a big high school party that is like the party to go to, and I've always found myself
high school party.
Yeah, man, it's like senior prom, and everybody's there, and Comic-Con in San Diego has just become this thing of like, well, which party are you going to? The nerds have completely lost control of it, and it's just become this big. All of Hollywood, transplants themselves to the Gaslamp District for 4 days and makes everybody feel not cool.
Yeah.
So EW party, I'm there and I'm just trying to not stand out like a sore thumb, like a tourist, and another tap on my shoulder, and I turn around and it's Ken, and he says, Kojima would like to see you. So I was like, I turned around, I was like, holy shit, there's Kojima right there. So we're kind of walking through the crowd of people of importance of Hollywood. And there's this kind of like small cluster of people, and this dude with shaggy hair, and Kojima's there, and he's like, oh, and he starts pointing to the guy, and he goes, Kojima's saying, he's like, you want to introduce you, this is your co-star. And I turn around and it's Norm, and he goes, hey man, I'm Norm. And I'm like, what is happening right now? What do you mean co-star? And that's how I found out that I was going to be in Death Stranding.
At a party.
And I was like, well, this is really happening. And then like a year happened, nothing.
What I love is that so far, all these stories have in common that you either were smoking or you probably had a drink in your hand. Yeah. It's possible none of these things happened. And so then it's like, how did you actually end up in Death Stranding?
It was weird. Very few people, I think, auditioned for this. It was more Kojima kind of assembled this cast of
Avengers, one
friends.
might say.
Yeah, literally. Kind of in my case. And so now 2.5 years later, like the first day I went for filming.
2.5 years. Was started shooting, or was the party?
2.5 years ago was the party, I think.
And so you started shooting when?
Started shooting December of, I just looked it up on my phone because we were talking about the fires. December of 2017, I was driving down to the reserve, the Sony stage in Marina del Rey. And that's when the 405 was just ablaze. Oh, yeah. And I was the last car that they let onto the 405. It was almost like, let them go. And I looked behind me, there's nobody there, and there's nobody coming up the other side. And the producer calls and she goes, hey, are you going to be able to make it into set? I was like, yeah, I just got it on the 405.
By literally the skin of your teeth.
Skin of my teeth. And fortunately, Norman was already on the west side, and so we were able to get there. But we walked outside, and it was like campfire. It was like the entire sky was like, what have we done? We've set forth the Kraken or whatever.
Yeah. Seems like this game was not meant to happen.
So that was December, the first day that we filmed, and we had 3 other shoots after that. And then, of course, all the ADR and everything that you do. And Norman is, I can't say enough good stuff about him, man.
Well, let me ask some specifics.
Go.
How do you, I'm curious, so you actually haven't answered my question about what.
That's a big lead up.
It's true. I got a great runway.
Okay.
The actual question was, what happened, or what did you glean from this that was unique to this? Because you've obviously done enormous amounts of voice acting, motion capture,
Sure,
all kinds of things in those veins. And so this could easily have just been another job, but there's just this assumption that because it's Kojima, it
Right.
couldn't possibly have been just another job. And so I'm curious, kind of, what can you learn, let's say your 200th times, probably, that's probably not even high enough. Let's say your 1,000th time out of the gate on a project. What do you learn fresh?
Great. I love the way you frame questions. Something that I learned from the other 999, let's using your math, is that
It's accurate. You know it's accurate.
It's not.
Your Twitter bio is literally, even I'm in too many things. Or even I think I'm in too many things, or something like that.
The thing that I've learned is that there's no silver bullet on how to do this. There's no class that you can take that's going to teach you. There's no workshop that you can go to that will prepare you. The thing that I've learned is that every time when I get out of my car and I walk onto a stage or onto a set or into a booth, it's going to be a different gig. And the second that I try to formalize that and make that a process, I'm automatically out of step with the creatives, because they have either their own way of doing things that I'm not really fully aware of, or they don't know what they want to do, and I'm just going to barrel over them, and we're no longer collaborating. So I walked in, I had no idea what this was going to be. I'd had a meeting with Kojima, and actually Ludwig, the composer, was there, and a few of the other creatives from Koji Pro that were walking me. I said, I want to know the story. I want you to walk me through the character, walk me through the world. I have enough of a knowledge of Kojima and his style and the world that he builds. He builds IPs, he builds worlds. He doesn't just make games, right? People call him a game maker, and he's not. He's a world builder. So I was like, I know that there's going to be a glossary of terms. I know there's going to be a bevy of characters, and there's going to be this huge world that he's creating. So as much as you can, walk me through that. And they downloaded over 2 hours as much as they could. And I was like, cool. And then I left. And that was my first day. So when I showed up on set, I walked in knowing it's going to be weird. It's going to be big. It's going to be ambiguous.
How much time is between those for you to kind of digest that download?
Probably about 2 weeks, I think.
And did you get anything prior to that meeting? Because games notoriously are shrouded in secrecy. Where,
this especially.
Yeah,
I
don't
think I even walked away with any materials. I think I saw a early rendering of what Higgs looked like. I knew Norman was involved, obviously. And I knew the name. I didn't know it was going to be the final name, but I knew it was going to be, I knew it was called, they were calling it Death Stranding or DS. And he walked me through. I found out, I didn't know who Mama was. I didn't know who Die Hardman was. I knew that Mads was on board, and I knew that Norman was on board. I had no idea who Mads was playing. And then at dinner that night, because we all went to dinner, it was Kojima and Ayako was his producer, and like wherever they're the two same people, they're always together. She's awesome. She's a beast. Ken is producer. Norman and Diane is partner were there, and then Lindsay Wagner walks in and sits down next to me, and I'm like, this is a fever dream now. And that's when I found out that Lindsay Wagner was going to be in the game. That she was going to play essentially 2 roles, right? She plays Amelie and President Strand. So I walked through and I understood enough of the glossary of terms. And then when I read the script, I was like, oh, okay. I knew what he meant when it was like, I wrote this for you, because it's very Ocelot-y. And there was only one way to kind of read it. And Norman was even kind of thrown off. He was like, you doing like a Southern thing? I'm like, well, and then he read the script. He was like, oh, okay, I got it. Because it just lends itself very well to that. And I also knew that what Kojima wanted was he wanted some flash in the pan.
Right.
I was like, okay. And everyone is very, very stoic in this game. And so Higgs kind of comes out of nowhere, and he is this grand villain, kind of is how he's being presented, at least. Gold mask,
Yeah.
and a lot of accoutrement and big grandstanding. So
It sounds like it was pretty guided, which is a question that I want to get to in general, to just make sure we kind of tap on this as we go.
sure, I wouldn't say that. That's a leap.
Okay, well, good. That's what I want to get into. Is I'm curious to hear, because having worked with you in a similar kind of role ish, I know where one of your strengths is in that exploration, and
Sure.
you love to find things, whether it's in the writing process or on the day, that you can't think 2 steps ahead to those things. They have
Right.
to arise out of the moment, or the collaboration in some way or another. And it's one of those that I think everybody, when looking at these projects like this, like The Last of Us or even Bioshock, for me, there's always that question of how much are things being dictated, versus how much are you finding? But specifically with Death Stranding, you're saying it was pretty explorational.
It was very explorative, but
I said explorational, and you said explorative, and I feel like we're going to have a showdown of which one of those.
I'm looking at your screen, which always
Cycling through words of the day.
As verbose as I believe that I am.
It was a bit recitative, actually. It's an opera term, funny enough.
Nobody in the world knows that. Like the person who
The
programmed
guy
that
that
word,
taught me that in college is like listening, going, "Fuck yeah!"
he remembered. I think that a lot was
Explorative.
explained explorationally. So much was communicated as far as like, here's what's happening. Here is what we're going for. Here's what it looks like.
And I really want to get into the specifics of that, because there's always this question of how do directors communicate with composers? Do they say, I want it in C major and I like string orchestra and a viola solo? Or do they say, I want it to be claustrophobic? Or do they say,
Right.
I just want it to feel open? Or,
Just as you have worked with directors that have said all of those above. So the same thing.
Yeah. So in a case like this one, when they say, here's what we're going for, specifically as an example, if you can remember, what would be, here's what we're going for. It's
right. So the
blank.
trailer that we saw where it was, here's Higgs' introduction, right? You're going to, you're kind of blipping in and out and you're moving around him. And it's this very ethereal that you clearly are have some supernatural ability to be able to kind of like warp and teleport. And you can also summon. So like when you do this, you're reaching your hand down into this and you're being able to summon this huge BT behind you. And it's going to look like this. It's going to have a body of a lion. And so he's giving me all of these descriptive things, but he's not saying, so then do this.
Yeah.
So it is literally, I'm giving you the salt and the flour and the egg and the sugar. Bake me a cake.
right.
And then we kind of like, Norm and I looked at each other and we're like, all right, well, what if we do this? And we baked a cake together and we took it out of the oven and we're like, what do you think? He's like, moving on. We're like, no shit, really? Okay. Because normally we would throw that cake away, we'd mix it up together, put it back in the oven for 15 more minutes this time to see what. And
does that make you self-conscious? Like thinking, are you sure that didn't feel done?
Yes. And so it's, as an actor, you look at that and go, my job is not to question it. My job is to deliver.
Right.
And if he thinks it's good enough, then fine. Because an actor always wants one more take.
Yeah.
There's always the best, like at an audition, the best take that you do is in your car on the way home. You're like, oh, that's what I should have done. But ultimately, I'll segue over a little bit, but stay on topic. Neil Druckmann originally was not the director for The Last of Us. He was not the creative director for The Last of Us. That happened in stages throughout the course of production. So originally, Gordon Hunt, who was also the director for the cutscenes, the cinematics for Uncharted, was brought on to be the director for The Last of Us. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Gordon has Emmys. Since he's passed, since then, incredibly accomplished, has taught me a lot about acting and directing both. And it was very clear from like, I think the second shoot, that we needed to find a different voice, because it was what worked for Uncharted wasn't tracking and scanning for The Last of Us. He took it gracefully. It was totally fine. They totally understood, stepped aside, and was like, who do we get? And they auditioned directors and interviewed a bunch of directors, and it became very obvious that Neil, no one would care for this more than he would. So once he...
and you'd already started casting and shooting. And,
oh, yeah.
Or, I mean, you had been cast and had already been shooting.
We had cast Ashley, me, Earl Brown played Bill. We had cast Henry and Sam. I think we had cast... I think the first one that he cast was Tess, Annie Wershing. That may have been the first thing, and then Merle Dandridge came after that. But yeah, we had already cast like half the game. And we already shot, truck ambush. We had already shot the first scene with Earl. I think we had shot almost all of the stuff with Earl. So we were like, this was like that story you hear about Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's some stuff that we went back and reshot because the game had changed, because we could now, in context of everything else, the scenes needed to change. But Neil came on, and I had developed over 10 years at that point of being an actor, both TV, film, games, everything else, of how I worked, what my process was. And my process was to do a scene and go back to Video Village and ask for playback so that I could see what I did. And I'd be like, got it. Okay, now I know what needs to change. So I'd go back into the scene and have in my mind where it wasn't working, everything, and tweak.
So in contrast to what you said before, when I asked about Death Stranding, and it was, there can't be a formulaic process. You're saying at this point you were maybe still naive enough to think
that there was.
This is the process. This will get us the results.
And not only is this the process, this is my process, and
right.
therefore my process is the process.
Yeah. Well, sounds like the whole thing about actors and egos is just
100%
beautifully living up to its reputation.
So Neil and I are walking. We had wrapped that day, and we were walking back. We walked out of the stage, which is the Culver stages are now gone. It's a real shame. The only stage that is left standing is the stage where they shot Wizard of Oz on, because it was protected by the whatever the term is,
like a landmark status.
Landmark status, yeah.
Really?
But the rest of it is a parking lot, and it's sad.
That's not on the Sony lot?
No,
really?
It was on the Culver Stages lot. So in
Culver
City,
because the Sony former MGM lot, the now called Barbra Streisand scoring stage, which was the MGM scoring stage, they recorded Wizard of Oz in that room. Judy Garland sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow in that room, and they were just using it to record Rise of Skywalker score with John Williams just in recent weeks. So that's like still an actively, 90 years in, that's still an active space, but I don't think it's landmark status. I think it's just Sony's like, well, it's still useful.
What was shot on the Culver Stages is mind-blowing. So much stuff was shot there. Beautiful little stage that nobody knew about. It was tucked away in Culver City.
They retrofitted it for mocap?
How much you need to do, really? You
just set up you
build a rig that has the camera.
Yeah, I see.
Camera system, and then everything else is just kind of like soundproofing as much as you can, so that they were able to shoot with audio.
Right.
Because originally they didn't, so that didn't come on until Uncharted 2.
Yeah.
So Neil and I are walking away, and you walk out of the stage, across a small parking lot, into a set of elevators, go down in the parking structure, and we're walking those elevators, and he goes, I think this was after rehearsal. So we were coming to shoot. He was like, hey, I have a challenge for you tomorrow. I was like, sure, what is it? And he said, I don't want you asking for playback anymore. And I went, excuse me? He goes, I don't want you to go behind and ask to have playback. And I went, okay, I know you're new. But let me explain to you.
Mr.
It's
Druckmann.
so cute. Let me tell you how it works. And I said, I need that. He goes, no, what you need is to trust me. And if I think it's good, and I say we're moving on, then we need to move on.
Does that mean that up to that point, there had been takes that he thought were good to go,
Most
and you
assuredly.
insisted? Was there an obvious tension? Was on set? Did you feel him?
Not one bit.
So he was holding it back, I guess, that he was frustrated at maybe the pace, if nothing else.
Not even that, but I think it's more of usurping a role and
Sure.
getting outside of your lane. It's like actors act, directors direct.
Yeah.
And trust me, this is a bi-directional thing. I know a lot of directors that wish that they could be in the scene, and so they're directing you the way that they would act it,
right?
As opposed to simply being open to the way that you want to do it,
Yeah,
or the way that it can be done.
That can't be productive.
It's not, but I mean,
it's the gig sometimes.
It's the gig, and we're talking on all levels of directors. The greatest ones, I'm using air quotes. I'll show you some scenes of Inglourious Bastards, where behind the scenes where Quentin Tarantino is literally right at the foot of I said Werner Herzog, what's his name, Christoph Waltz, during the Danish scene, and he is talking him through the entire thing.
Wow.
And it's like, yep, yes, I got the note. Thank you very much. Yes, right. And it's like, and then you say, and then she says, and so you're looking at it, and it's like, and you just finally see Christoph going, he just glosses over, and he's like, this is now the point of masturbation. I'm gonna let you finish, and then we're gonna do the scene. And
well, clean up.
Yeah.
Then we'll do the scene.
I'm not gonna do it with on my leg. So
how did you so how do you take that? You're in the elevator, and he says that, and you think, you're adorable. But was that hard to swallow and then come in the next day or whatever it was and do that and trust him?
At that point, man, I want to make sure that I'm remembering it correctly. And I don't know if he would tell a different story, but I feel like I adapted pretty quickly. But I also realized how
he actually said,
I'll tell you,
just last month or whenever wrapping Last of Us 2, you finally got the memo.
I'm now at the point where I don't watch. And even on Death Stranding, I think there was a point where Kojima thought that I was not caring because everybody would gather around. And everybody has their own way of doing things. Norman's at the point in his career and his life that maybe he doesn't need to. He's just kind of curious to see what it looks like. I had to separate myself because I got to direct all the cinematics for Shadow of War. And so I was so used to not watching playback, but then as a director, I needed to watch playback to see what everybody got. And we can go down that rabbit hole here in a little bit. But I still feel I haven't answered your question. The thing about Death Stranding is that there is, everybody wants, I think that if everybody watched the way that we made it, watching those things is goofy.
Well, I think, I obviously don't know. I wasn't there for any of it. Sure. But I remember seeing some early on promo thing with Mads Mikkelsen where he said something to the effect of, none of us have any fucking idea what we're doing. As actors, we have no idea how we fit into this. Yeah. And we just trust that Kojima is this mad scientist where it will all add up in the end. Mm-hmm. But sort of in the distilled down singular moments of this scene, that line, it's not clear how this adds up.
Right.
And so here's a two-part question. Is that remotely normal? And two, is that, to the extent that it's normal or not, does the fact that you learned that trust and that you had to embrace this, a way of working, is that what makes that possible? Or would it have been maddening to just think, I have no idea, I'm just flying blind?
I think that as an actor, it's a wonderful exercise because you go, all right, let's put this through the lens of my character. My character has no idea what's going on. So I don't need to know if my anger level right now, is it at a 6 or at an 11 compared to what? All I know is this moment has me this angry. And I'm going to trust whoever has more of a global perspective to be able to look back and go, dial it back.
Right.
Because they know in Act 6, because this is not 3-act, that we're going to need you to be at an 11. Right. And right now...
but that is a pretty big leap of trust, as it were, that somebody has your back on that. Because it's hard to have a global view on something of this scale. I mean, this game's huge.
Yeah, but what's the worst that happens?
Well, the worst that happens for me as a player
Yeah.
is that it feels like it's tonally all over the place.
Okay. I think I can't think about that, right? Because I want to, and it's a challenge for me, especially as I.
So it's a discipline to not let that kind of influence or
to not think about your
infect
Metacritic, to not think about
Well, yeah.
right. Because as I transition from, I've transitioned from playing games to being in games to now making games, and it's hard for me.
I wouldn't say transition. I'd say you keep adding on top.
True, because I still love
Still
playing
play games, you're
I
still
still
in
love being
games.
in games, but now this new layer of like understanding or learning how the industry works from a multitude of angles, and now my game is I love how the car looks, but what I really love is opening the hood and seeing how everything works.
Yeah.
And really having this new appreciation for why a Ferrari has this brilliant craftsmanship.
See, that seems like to me that would actually make it harder then to because that would make me, that's not Metacritic, but that is leaning towards the how is all of this going to piece together. And if you're saying you have to let all that go, it would seem like that requires even more discipline now if you're getting further and further under the hood of the car.
100%.
So did that mean that Death Stranding, because obviously that came into your life where you have been doing more directing now relative to back when you did The Last of Us. Did that mean that this was inordinately challenging as a result?
100%. Because my job wasn't to change the oil, it was to drive the car.
Yeah.
Or actually in times just to be a passenger in the car. So the second that I wanted to get out and go, you know what you actually should do is check the timing on this, because you're not as efficient as you are and you're actually losing.
Right.
Like all of that. So you change the tires. That's not my job. My job is to sit in that passenger seat and be in the car. That's it. And there's a temptation then to just be laissez-faire and not care. And the balance and the discipline comes from going, okay, how do I let this be my best that I feel it can be without questioning, without challenging, or without doubting?
I think that's a lot easier said than done, especially the whole thing that you just said about not checking out. The first several decades, I would say, of games with recorded VO were overwhelmingly very weak performances. And I think
probably not by weak performers.
Yeah, yes. Well, exactly. That's my assumption, because first off, there's always exceptions. I mean, I think last year at E3, Tim Schafer did this 20th anniversary Grim Fandango table read with all the original cast.
Oof.
And it was fucking amazing. Like it was, and it reminded me of just how good those performances were. And this is 1997. So, right. Or 98, something like that. So there have always been great performances, but it was far from, it's still, I don't even know if I would still call it the norm, partly because it seems like it's such an insane challenge because it's so out of context. You know, if you're shooting a movie, you're on a set, even if it's a Lord of the Rings or a Star Wars where there's green screen galore, and you know, your set is closer to a mocap stage or fully a mocap stage, like an Avatar kind of situation or something. There's still sets, and there's still, you know, daily shooting for 6 months or something. And there's a lot of things that I think make sense as to their, to the extent that the actor is leaning into all of that, it's helping them. It's giving them the material to draw on, and so much, especially for the first, before mocap became relatively normal in games, it's all in the booth. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Well, stepping into a booth and it's like, okay, you're on an alien planet.
No, I'm not.
You've just killed the biggest, baddest fucking thing, but we have lunch in 20 minutes. Yeah, exactly. It just seems like it's as you said, very weak performances by otherwise very capable or potentially brilliant performers.
Right. That, and let's go to 2004, right? At that point, you had I think Devil May Cry had come out. So there was some mocap involved in that. You had some Silent Hills, some Resident Evils. You had some games that had done motion capture. But by and large, ones that were lampooned more than they were lauded, right?
It's like FMV. It was
for sure.
It was a dabbling in a thing that felt like dark magic we should all never do again.
But most of those people that you're not going to get someone at that time who was like a Norman Reedus or a Mads Mikkelsen or
Exactly.
Lindsay Wagner, who could see the benefit, the value, and the legitimacy of this medium. We can't go out to, which I'm sure many of them did. What if we went out to your hot actor?
Yeah, Viggo Mortensen.
Right now,
you were just in Lord of the Rings.
You were just in Lord of the Rings. You would go to that, and you can't even get past the assistant of the agent.
Yeah.
To even get the script to them, to even talk to them about it. So what you get is, I did an episode of Battlestar.
The 1978
Battlestar. And I haven't worked since. I really need to make my insurance. And so you're going to bring me on and you're going to pay me $500 a day.
Yeah.
And you're going to work me 12 hours a day. And I'm really hungry, but I want to have this process and really get involved. And it's like theater, but what do you mean I can only stand here and I can't touch this, and there's nobody else here on the set with me, and I'm doing this all by myself, and that's a door, but there is no door, and there's a table that's a chair. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And then you go, now really give me
Yeah.
a very nuanced, impactful performance. And you're like, I can't give you that. So Ian McKellen lost his shit on the set of The Hobbit because of the way that they were working, right? He's side by side. They're shooting him simultaneously with a Hobbit so they could shoot, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was just like, I'm not acting with anyone. This isn't what I signed up for. And he couldn't stand that process.
Yeah.
It's
maddening. And that's way, quote, easier, I would
way
think,
easier.
by comparison. Because
at least you're in wardrobe. At least you're on a set.
Yeah. Exactly.
I remember it was what was his name? Bill Nighy showed up for Christmas Carol, I think it was, or something, or no, maybe it was Beowulf. And they're like, okay, so here's the mocap suit. He was like, I wouldn't wear that. My character wouldn't wear that. And they're like, well, here's the deal. You're right, but you're wrong. Your character wouldn't wear this, but you absolutely will if you want to be your character. And I've worked with, I've had the fortune of working with really, really great actors that are definitely way more known for either TV or film, or both.
Right.
And to see them or audition with people who he brought in, when it's like, I remember someone specifically who was very skilled and very accomplished actor, goes through the scene and asks Neil, it doesn't matter. It was for The Last of Us. Asked Neil, like, do you want anything different? Because, I mean, if this was like, it's like a TV or film, I would be like doing this with some emotion. And Neil just very coolly responds, yeah, do that.
Wow.
And as people just didn't understand, they were like, it's a video game.
Yeah, exactly.
This is Mario. This is Call of Duty. People don't understand.
There are musical equivalents of all of that. To this day, I have been interviewed for so many articles still to this day in 2019 that are like, the headline is, it's not just boops and beeps anymore. It's like that headline was old in 2005.
Right.
And you are still using it because there's still this, it's funny that games are just vastly economically larger than
most film.
Film and TV and the music industry all combined.
Sure.
Which that number is slightly cheating because
the price point.
The game industry is also kind of a hardware. Like you include the sales of the PlayStation with that, which is part of the game industry. But you don't. If I go buy a Sony Bravia TV, that's the electronics industry. Or
does that count for TV and film?
It's not the TV. Yeah. So there are some reasons why that number gets baked a little. I've heard pushback on the flag waving of that, but nonetheless, even still, it's nowhere close. And yet there is still this kind of like, it's the
stigma.
the kid brother thing. And I would think for actors, especially like you said, if you're a big, movie star, there's this sense of like, oh, those things. And then you get into the room and you realize, fuck, this is really hard.
Everybody that has ever walked in who is predominantly operated in the space of TV and film, on camera work, they clamor back to jobs like this, and especially if they've worked on something like The Last of Us, where I'm like, you need to understand, it's not always like this.
Yeah,
there's a lot of like not to disparage, but CSI procedural, there is no rehearsal. It's just we're shooting. Don't worry about what your character's motivation is. We just have a scene to shoot, and you're a plot pusher. You move the story forward and you get out. That's by and large what a lot of games are.
Yeah.
Is unless you're the top 5 or the lead or something, and a lot of times if you're doing not doing a performance capture piece, you're not going to have that level of agency to be able to really go, well, I would probably do this subtle and nuanced. Like, that's an awesome thing. We don't have the animation to support that.
Yeah.
But I have seen actors go, man, this is really the way, because it's like theater. It's bringing me back to my roots.
Yeah.
But I don't have to sell this to the cheap seats. I can make this knowing that there's going to be a 50 millimeter lens on me, really pushing in close. That's really helping sell the intimacy of this moment.
So what do you think made it click for you if so many actors struggle? Mm-hmm. And maybe you struggled for a long time and it took a long time to feel comfortable. You tell me. But you seem to, when I played The Last of Us, I don't think we knew each other when The Last of Us came out. I think we may have met or something, but I can't remember.
It was after.
I can't remember, but I just remember when I played that game, my memories of the experience of that game are not attached to our relationship. I don't see it as like texting you.
Dude, I just got to the part where.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have it as that kind of a memory. I have it as a memory of just being like a gamer again in this very pure way of being just mind blown every 20 minutes. And I remember saying, and I hope this doesn't sound disparaging of the game, but I remember saying, this is a very ordinary game in many respects.
Yeah.
It's basically a survival shooter that's got some things I really love that I can't hoard my inventory, for example, because I'm always that guy that finishes the game with 10 times more ammo than I need because I'm afraid that some boss battle's coming where I'm going to need
drain
it.
You.
So yeah, and so this game did a really good job at preventing me from this non-immersive behavior of mine. Mm-hmm. And I remember, but by and large, I thought this is a, dare I say, generic game that has infused within it maybe the best performance and writing of any game ever. And I thought by the time it finished, I thought this for sure is going to be one of my favorite games I've ever played. Yeah. And normally I don't label something that way that I also have such a clear criticism of, where I think the caliber of the writing and of, you and Ashley it's like it takes the genericness of the gameplay and it yanks it up into orbit through force of will. Because it just says, I don't care that you've played this game mechanically 100 times. Right. We're going to infuse it with meaning through this other element to such an extreme that you will then say, this is among the best experiences I've had in this medium ever. I can't think of any other game that can be sort of asymmetrical like that. Because normally if something blows you away, it's like every element of it is seemingly revolutionary.
Right.
I just bring all that up because when I played it, I remember thinking, these are real actors. And I don't want that to imply that, playing games prior to that, they weren't real actors. Like you said, they were probably amazing performers that were kind of boxed into this inorganic situation. But I say all that as a preface, not to sit here and flatter you. The question is, it was so overwhelming to me how you seem to click into, you were able to bring to, Loaded for Bear, to set and to the booth and to wherever and however you were using your skills on that game, shooting, recording, blah, blah, blah. You were so comfortable. It felt like, maybe that's not the right word because I know
it's an interesting choice.
Your sort of smirk is telling. I simply mean you were using the full extent of your instrument. And it felt like there's a guy who's an actor down to the genetic level and was given the chance to do everything that he's capable of down to the genetic level. That was how I felt. It was no different. I was, we just recorded, this is going to be all published out of order, but talking yesterday with Bear about God of War and I said, this felt like a score where you were just allowed to run like this stallion that had been bucking, desperate to get out of the stable, and finally was set loose in this field.
Yeah.
I said, it really felt like you were told, now go be a composer. Because there's so many things about it that worked and felt like they needed that. And so the question, and there is a question. Sure. This isn't just me saying, listen to me talk about you. Not that you're hating it.
I know you well enough, dude.
Yeah, this is theoretically a setup. The question is, what do you think makes you so wired to be able to thrive in that, whereas so many actors that may be even more tenured than you would walk into that and they could be the most brilliant actor alive and they would have struggled, whereas you got to fire on all cylinders? What do you think wires you for? Because it is so inorganic, seemingly, to acting. What about you makes you able to step into that, do you think? I
was so ready to answer a different question.
Was it a better one? We can go with that one. That question may have been 10% Blanton's.
I think it's 20%. I think that for me, the edge that I have is that I'm trying to make a game that I'm going to want to play. And I've played the games that have made me want to do this.
Just as a quick side note, is there a game that performance made you go, how do I get into this? Uncharted. It was. Were you doing primarily animation and stuff like that? Or?
I had done some anime, and I was actually doing. I'd done Brothers in Arms at that point.
So you had dipped your toes into games.
Yeah, I think I was probably ankle deep at that point.
Got it.
I had just moved out to LA. I had done a movie that had opened up some doors for me, and I had done anime. I'd done a little bit of animation, I think, and I'd done some really shitty movies and TV. And I was doing one of those particular shitty movies back in Texas with a buddy of mine in the dead of Texas winter, which is cold and unforgiving on all levels. Like, just question like choices in your life. And the only solace that I tell this story a lot, the only solace that I had in a really, really shitty hotel room, man, I cannot convey to you enough the conditions that we were under. And not that these producers, they're bootstrapped. They had no money. All I had was a PS3 that my buddy had loaned me out of mercy and compassion. It was like, here. And he's like, you really need to play this game. I've just finished playing it, and I haven't seen anything like it. And this guy had been in games for 20 years at that point, and we had done a lot of games together. So I'd done like Ghostbusters. Not Ghostbusters yet, but we had done like Blood Rain together, and we had done a handful of like Spy Hunter and some shit together before. So I trusted his opinion on games, and it was Uncharted. I was like, dude, I can't wait. And so I went home or to my hotel room, and I plugged in my PS3, and then I went out of my hotel to the Blockbuster across the street and rented Assassin's Creed because that looked cool, and I played that instead. And
that's great.
Uncharted sat there, and finally I beat Assassin's Creed in like 3 days, and I was like, oh, this is so great. And I was like, here we go, I'm putting this Uncharted game, and I went, boy, I played this in the right order, because I saw Assassin's Creed accomplished a lot of things mechanically, systemically, and from like, it never got old. Doing that leap of faith ever gets old.
I remember, I specifically remember
Tower Climbing Simulator.
Yeah, and I'll never forget that the investment that they did from an animation in the cloth and the fabric of your outfit.
Yeah, that
was one of those that I just remember playing, and I just was mesmerized watching my own character's just sort of ambient movement in the wind. It was because, there's just only typical up to that point, there's just only so much that you can give to, when you have a whole world you need to be rendering here and polygons that have to be spoken for, especially cloth simulation that involves a lot of physics, basically, and not that I'm an expert, as that sentence is demonstrating. It blew my mind purely technically. I
It
just
was
thought,
the riding of the horses that got me. I was like, holy, I feel
same.
like I'm riding a horse. This is so great. And I had just done a Western. So that that was a very visceral thing for me.
Yeah.
But the performances, not to disparage the great Altair, I was like, woof, what is going on? This guy is terrible. I didn't even like Desmond Miles, to be honest with you, which the irony of that is that it's Nolan North in both, right?
You were like, that guy needs to take a fucking lesson from Drake over here.
From Drake, because that guy's a hack. I didn't know until years later that was Nolan. And but
so
what
funny.
that speaks to the process, because then I put in Uncharted and I was like, what is this? And I remember emailing. I knew enough about games to know that the audio guy is probably who you want to talk to.
Yeah.
So I emailed Phil Kovacs and I was like, dude,
Yeah.
just to let you know, I love what you did. This is a truly accomplishment. Would love to work with you one day. That's it. And send it off into the ether. Never, ever, ever, ever did I think that 6 years later I would be working with them, and on the kind of project that literally changed my life.
Let's back up, because I so love just diving straight into this like raw red meat. This is just
dude.
full into it. But I think because there's going to be a general familiarity, at least that with your involvement in these projects, certainly The Last of Us, it's worth just giving us the quick kind of Cliff's Notes of where you came from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you said you were shooting, you went back to Texas.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I love that the whole back to part may be lost on some folks listening.
Yeah.
So why don't you just give us the
born and bred in Dallas, and I
probably the other order, reverse from that, I'm guessing.
born and bred. I was bred then born. Yeah. Not a lot of breeding going on.
From the finest sire.
From the and I mean, my background was music. I thought that I was going to set the world on fire with my rock and roll, and no. So
Well, we can circle back to that, because I wouldn't discount that either.
But I like how I'm being able to do it now. But what I love is that the vocation that was awaiting me was not the one that I had intended.
Yeah.
But it was allowed. I met my wife through my girlfriend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were doing an album at this studio in Dallas, and while they were like tracking drums or something that I had no business being a part of, but I got to hang around a studio and learn the gear. Like I learned the business end of a mic. I learned about compression and EQ, and I love gear. I love
You're a big
vintage
nerd for
gear.
that stuff.
Huge nerd.
Every time we've been in a studio together,
It's like, what's your loadout, man?
there will be 100-piece orchestra on the other side of the glass,
I'm staring
and you're
at the
back in the
desk.
corner with the Pro Tools guy saying, like, now, what kind of preamp is that? Because
Yeah,
I don't
dude.
see where the cable's going into the, and it's like you're very curious
I
and
look at
very
that
wired
patch
for
band. I
that.
was like, please tell me that you're using a 1073 right now, the LA2A on that piano right now, because you know it's going to make it sing. He's like, actually, I'm using two Gefell mics that's going through the, you know, that's me.
It is.
And it's because I learned the musicality and the poetry and the art that is engineering and recording. And wherever I go, like on a film set, I was like, hey, mister, what does that button do?
Yeah.
And I would hang out with the audio guys, I would hang out with camera, I would hang out with lighting. And I was just always the guy that I was trying to suck the marrow out of every moment.
But there's something I think it's that alone, I think, is an interesting kind of preview of the career that would come about, because it's hard to imagine someone achieving a huge amount of success in something if they're not at all curious about what everybody else is doing around them.
Hey, what do you do? And why is your job important?
Yeah.
Because I think most actors, or honestly, and you could swap out that role with anybody else especially a film set, they come in and whatever I'm doing is clearly the most important job. And without me, this thing wouldn't happen. And then what that taught me very early on, but it took me years to apply that, is that I am the most dispensable person that's on this. And that I can, and most actors feel that they're, you know, they won't come out of their trailer
Yeah, of
unless
course.
they're. And it's like, no, you're just too expensive to replace. But I can, because you can call it. I've got 20 grips that I can call right now that can come and do and gladly, willingly do this job. I have to go through an agent and a manager and a union and set up transportation and do a whole new deal. Let's go back to a lawyer. It's just a bullshit process. But to be honest with you, I can get anybody to go, would that be all for you today, sir? And it's just, it's a 100% ass backwards way of doing things.
Yeah.
I understand, like, I as I get more and more involved in this, I kind of understand Hitchcock more. Like, I get the fact that he was just like, they're props that eat. And it all, whenever you can avoid dialogue, by God, do so. If you can do this diegetically and without using performance of actors, it's like, fuck, all right, Vivian Lee, will you please say the line? Because otherwise we can't get out of this scene. I'm going to need you to scream on this one, sweetheart. Norman, can you just not talk? So
it's funny, just as a slight aside from that,
Yeah.
As an example of something that I like, a friend of mine worked on a movie a couple of years ago with John Malkovich, and he told me, the director told me, that Malkovich, I think he's very much wired the same as you.
Okay.
He walks onto the set and he looks at the cinematographer and he says, "What kind of lens are you using?" And the guy says, "Oh, we're shooting such and such type of lens." And he says, "Does that mean that based on where you're sitting, the edge of the frame is going to fall right here?
Yeah.
And I'll probably look a little weird if I'm at this point in the frame, but think here because it distorts in this part of that." And it's like, this guy, he could walk on the set and internalize from the other side of the camera what the camera was looking at, because he'd spent so much time caring about that stuff.
Dude.
And it's like, that's an actor, my God. Never mind the performance he's then able to bring, but just like that enjoyment of the process is so cool. And so it's hard not to be inspired by that. But you made it sound like that was a slow awakening, maybe is the right word.
Honestly, even I discovered that, just to speak to that point, I discovered that. I wrestled with that even on Uncharted 4. Neil and I, because I'd really started getting into camera and I'd really started getting into lenses and I'd really started showing a desire to direct around that time. And so I was asking him, so where's camera going to be?
Yeah.
Because if I'm here, then
he was like, we need to go back to that elevator that we were
a little
in.
bit. And he was like, I need you not to worry about where camera is, because right now I don't even know. I just want you to shoot the scene and I'll build my cameras around you. Now that's a different kind of director.
Yeah.
Another kind of director would be like, don't move. I'm on an 85 and this is a story about your left eye.
Yeah.
And if you shake at all, I'm going to blow my focus and I'm really trying to tell a story. Neil is the kind of person that's like, and he drives DPs crazy. He was like, what do you want to be? And I was like, I don't know right now, man. I haven't seen the scene yet. And he lets performance 100% drive everything.
That's surely a luxury that only a project like The Last of Us or Uncharted can afford, right? I mean, because that strikes me...
I think it's just a different way of doing things. I think some people go in and they go, I've dealt with projects where they're like, we've already storyboarded this. So if we change this, we have to change our storyboards. I'm like, no, you don't. You have to allow them to develop and evolve. But it doesn't have to stick to what your idea of the scene was. My God, let it change. Let it grow and go, holy shit, I never thought it could be like this. But some magic happened in the moment between two humans that had, that's why I have this tattoo, man. It's the Hegelian dialectic that is synthesis or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and how those things can come together and form a much larger view than yours or mine. And that's what I'm always trying to find. And there's a lot of creatives, and there's a lot of, especially people within games, that are so scared. Because if you go back, man, to...
Because theoretically, we're still talking about, like, coming of age in Texas and all that.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah, whatever.
If we go back...
I stumbled. Before there was Metacritic, we made a different type of game.
Right.
Before there were awards, we made a different type of game. And I don't say this to blow smoke, but
everyone knows the only award that matters is the DICE Awards.
So we walked into... When you walked into this pop-up gallery that they did for the Death Stranding thing, the first thing you saw, it was really cool. It was like, here's all the badges that from the start of when Kojima was talking about this, he had on display. So he had like everything from
Like
E3,
E3,
to
yeah.
TGS, but it was all on. It was really cool. And then it was the awards, and right in the middle was this weird gold Star Trek looking obelisk. And Lindsay Wagner goes, I don't understand what these mean. And I was like, well, the one that looks like a hood ornament Rolls Royce is Keeley's award. That's the video game awards. And it said most people in the industry consider that like the Oscars, right? That's kind of the big show. It's the red carpet. It's the big publicized, televised event. She was like, what about this one? I was like, this is, and I love Jeff. Jeff is a dear friend of mine. He understands what Jeff is trying to do is move the industry forward as much as he can with his type of award show. And the way to do that is he wants to bring awareness to it. If you want to have awareness to it, right, you have to make it a production. If you want to make a production, you have to bring in sponsors because not everybody can do that. DICE goes, fuck it. This is industry voting on industry.
Yeah.
And it is internal, and we're going to do a closed show. If you want to dress up, great. If you don't, great. We're going to have a drink. We're going to have some meal, some food, and we're going to sit and we're just going to celebrate each other. And it's one of the coolest vibes. If you ever are fortunate enough to go to that show, first of all, it's in Vegas, which is great. But it is, you sit down at a table with your peers that are applauding you. And that DICE award, this is one thing that I love about, and I swear to God, we could be doing one. I'm not doing this because of you guys. Best character.
Yeah.
Not best performance, not best actor, best character, which means there is a recognition that it is a culmination of the actor, of the character design, of the implementation, of everybody.
Animation.
Of the animation, of everything that made that character. And one of those things can fuck it up for all of it.
Yeah.
If I didn't feel like I was playing Joel, or you go down the list, then I didn't feel like the best character. Did I feel like I was Kratos? Did I feel like that's what I loved? Who won this year? It was Kratos that won. But the nominations were like all over, and it wasn't just like the lead in this, the lead in this, and the lead in this. It was like this character that was just really, really cool. That level of recognition is something that nobody else does, because especially when it comes to actor, they want to put a face on it, because wouldn't it be cool if Mads Mikkelsen was accepting an award? Doesn't that legitimize us?
Yeah, yeah.
If Norman Reedus gets up there, if Mark Hamill gets up there, if someone that, by the way, Mark Hamill lost twice on the Video Game Awards because he was Luke Skywalker from then, not Luke Skywalker from now. And the person that won was the guy from The Office. It's the guy that played in Portal.
Oh yeah, I can't remember. I know who you're talking about. But
so look, I'm not disparaging other game shows, because everything from, I love what BAFTA does, and I love what Keeley is doing, even Golden Joystick.
But your point that you started it with was the agenda of game developers before there was the possibility of winning an award was completely different.
Way more fuck it.
Yeah, far more experimental.
We're 6 to 9 month dev cycle. Our burn rate is way lower.
This is all stemming from your comment about, well, we can't change it because the storyboard's X, Y, and Z. And I think
there's no trust. The thing that made Last of Us so good, and what allowed me to click, is trust. Period. We took the time. We weren't trying to crank through 20 minutes of a cinematic, which is on average you're going to shoot, if you're hoofing it, 10 to maybe 15 minutes a day of actual cinematic material. Right. So you're doing 10 to 15 pages on a TV show like a CSI. You can probably crank through 10 to 12, maybe, if you're like just blowing and going. If you got big set pieces, or if you got a big action sequence, or if you have multiple locations, that's going to go down. But a film is going to do, oh my God, 3 to 5, maybe 6 to 8 pages a day, and that's just exactly. Like crazy.
And with plenty of days that are two-page days,
If you're trying to go through 10 pages It's like, we could spend all day working on this scene. We got to go because we're burning through our budget. On average, it costs $50,000 to $65,000 a day to shoot performance capture.
Wow.
$50,000 to $65,000 per day. So if you shoot 20 days, which is about the length of doing an indie movie, right?
20 days for a movie shoot is crazy.
20
fast.
days, but that's also like most indie movies, right?
Yeah.
But we're not shooting indie movies. We're shooting something that is on par with a tentpole summer blockbuster.
Yeah.
We're doing something that would be like
and yet so often they are still produced, like The Last of Us and things like that stand as the exception, because you can have $150 million games that still blast through their performance in the way that you're describing. At least this is what it looks like to me, because most of that budget's actually going towards the insane amounts of art assets and animation and production
and
tech.
production and all of those things.
A giant army of programmers and so you don't get to shoot it with the luxury of a 6-month shoot the way a $100 million movie would, where you're getting through a page or two per day.
My guess, if I had to translate that into film dollars, Last of Us would have been shot for about $5 million.
5 million?
5 million.
That does not, my brain can't compute that. Like, how many days was The Last of Us?
We probably all in shot for 60 days, maybe. And that's not including VO.
Yeah. I guess, that could make, like, that's like,
I may be wrong.
Get Out or something, like
that's
like a $5 million movie or so.
But multiple locations, 40, huge set pieces, big action sequences, multiple actors. Yeah, it's not like a typical Coen Brothers movie. Like,
right. Well, so let's because I would love to kind of retroactively lay this foundation from an hour ago. Who is
Start
Troy?
At the end.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love this. I love getting because Death Stranding is just such this event culturally in games right now that I couldn't resist just going straight after it.
Sure.
But you were going to be the next,
I don't think I was ever going to be the next, but I wanted
but you thought that was your ambition, right? I'm going to be the next, like,
every band
Dave
that I could.
Grohl? Who's the next?
Yeah, dude, at that point, man, that would have been awesome.
But that was the dream. That was the fantasy, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, my inspirations have always been like, I look at the frontmen, I'm David Bowie, Ian Atsbury. It's a swath of characters because I go everywhere from like a David Bowie or a Bono to Jeff Buckley, who was the anti-frontman.
Right.
But that's what I wanted to do. I'm a professional musician, touring musician. And we were always one meeting away from that next big deal. We broke up and we got a record deal.
Really?
Yeah, like we had recorded an album. They were going to take our album, slap their sticker on it and put it out. And we got nationwide distribution on an album that we couldn't tour. Because they provided no tour support. And so we would get SoundScan numbers back. Like, hey, you sold 2 copies of your album in Dubuque. We're like, how? Did someone just like trip and fall and accidentally scan our CD? And this was also 2003. So this is right when the music industry was like, we're dead.
Yeah.
We have no idea. There was no, this is interesting, man. Within the last week, I did this like little whirlwind tour, and we did London and then Paris, and then I went Slovenia, and then back to Paris, back to London, to LA for 4 hours, to New York, and then back to LA. Did the red eye? I was going to say,
according to Instagram, you were in New York like yesterday.
Yesterday, I got in 1:00 this morning.
Yeah.
And especially in London and Paris, I'm just by myself. London was big press and con and stuff, but Paris was just like, you have 2 days to decompress. What do you want to do? So I walked a lot. They have the Lime bikes there now, and so I did like a scooter. If you know Paris at all, I took a scooter from basically the Arc de Triomphe down to the Bastille, all the way to Montmartre until the battery ran out. And I was a Spotify hater, and you can sync it up to your Google Maps now. And so I had one headphone in, and I was like, I wanted to listen to. I was walking through the Tuileries Gardens, and I wanted to listen to this Jeff Buckley song. And so I did, and I just let it play, and I jumped on a scooter, kept going, and it was like, you can't stop, because I've got my hands firmly on the handlebars because you're moving through Parisian traffic.
Right.
And Spotify was like, let's just kind of take you on an adventure, man. And I went all
when you said
place.
it was linked to Google Maps, to do what?
So I would listen to Spotify, and then I was listening to Google, or I pulled up Google to try to get to where I was going. And so Google Maps was kind of directing me and saying, this is where you want to go. But say, hey, do you want to link to your Spotify? I was like, sure. It's like, great. And so as I started my Google, it started my Spotify.
It's not reacting to your
It's not like, if you turn left, we're going to play,
that's why the way you said that, I was like, I'm leaning forward going, go on.
But I was hip to Pandora and Apple Music and everything before that. But the thing that Spotify, I found this band called the Paper Kites. And there was this one song that played. I was like, whoa, wow, this thing is just resonating with me. And it had been a while since I'd really heard a record that had done that for me. And I pulled over and checked out. I was like, who is this? I didn't want to let it pass by and not know who it was. So I liked it. And then I was like, well, now that I'm stopped, who is this? I sent them a message. And they wrote me back, and they were like, dude, thank you so much. And I was like, good luck on the tour, because they're starting their UK EU tour. And I stopped and I went, what just happened is remarkable.
Yeah.
I discovered a band, connected with the band, they connected with me, and now I have a whole new level of appreciation for them and their music. And I feel there's a relationship there now. And Spotify does that for millions of people every day. And that blew my mind. I was like, man, I have been this, I'm not a Luddite, I embrace our new robot overlords. I willingly sacrifice myself to all Apple products, and I think we have 5 Alexas in our house.
You have like a management structure.
Yeah,
that's
there
emerging.
is. So it's like Alexa in the kitchen is the boss.
The senior level Alexa, yeah.
But I'd always hated Spotify, and because I didn't understand it. And now I was like, this is a really cool way for people to discover music.
Oh, yeah.
And it's easy to sit back and go, music right now, it sucks. I'm like, well, how about you try looking and seeing? Because right now there's actually some really, really good music that's out.
I would argue it's the best time in the history of humanity to be a musician.
100%. And that was the problem that we had, is that it was this normal system of, all right.
You were right at the pivot point of the old school record.
iTunes had just started, but the only band that was on it was U2. And you couldn't, as an indie artist, submit yourself for iTunes.
Right, yeah. Self-publishing didn't exist.
So, and it was before Bandcamp. It was before all of these amazing platforms for indie artists started, and the record industry still held with an iron fist the whole thing. But they also had no money.
Yeah, they were also bleeding because of Napster.
Because of Napster.
Yeah.
And so we had nothing. And so that quickly fell away. And I had been doing this little anime and some commercial work. And
did that come about? Because, were you just at a coffee shop and some guy was like, hey, you got a nice voice?
A buddy of mine who was in the music scene, Dave McGarry, said, my day job is working, doing music for this game developer, and we're doing this World War II game. Do you want to come? You got a cool voice. You want to step into a closet that had no air conditioning, no lights, and I had a battery operated light that I read my script by, and just be this guy. And then I would be sweating, and we would take breaks, and we'd come back in, and we'd do as much as we could. And that was Brothers in Arms. And
was that a positive experience?
Great. It was awesome.
So you didn't feel like, what the hell is this garbage? It was exciting.
It was super exciting. Yeah, it was fun. It was acting, and I always I want to try to do that.
And this was in Dallas.
This was in Dallas. And then another buddy of mine, how did I even meet? I can't even remember. Oh, I think it was dating a girl. He was dating a girl that said, hey, they're doing auditions for this company called Funimation. And they do like Japanese cartoons. I was like, all right. So I drove out there and I auditioned like a general audition. And they were like, okay. And so I got a job, and it was like, I think it paid $50 an hour or $35 an hour. And I was like, if I do this as my job, and I'm doing this 40 hours a week,
not bad.
5 days, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be making so much money. And I flipped out, and I didn't know that's not how it worked. You got a job once a month if you're lucky, and you made $100, and then you starved. And then I met this guy, Chris Sabat, who was like, hey, you're really good. I want to bring you in on this show. And then, by the way, you should get an agent because there's this commercial that for Brothers in Arms that they want to do. And then my agent was like, hey, do you also want to do TV and film? I'm like, sure. She's like, okay, go to Houston because they're casting for this pilot. I'm like, okay. So I drove down to Houston. I had no money to do that. And I hung out.
That's not true. You were making $30 an hour.
I was making $30 an hour. And I booked the pilot. And then a month later, a director was casting for a movie, and I had done the pilot with Lou Diamond Phillips. Lou was the lead in the movie, and he happened to see who the director was bringing in. He was like, if you don't hire that kid, it's a huge mistake. And so I walked into the audition with it being mine to lose. So I did that movie, and then I auditioned for this Western in Dallas that ended up shooting in Santa Fe. That's where I met Val Kilmer. And he and I became friends, and it just boom, boom, boom. I'm literally stumbling after this whole thing.
And did you have, because you were so wired for music, did you have any acting? Did you ever take like acting classes and that kind of thing, or were you just
like church plays? I never got cast in a school play because my teachers always knew that my grades were going to suck because I just didn't do my homework. And so one of my teachers actually told me we were doing South Pacific, and I had auditioned for Joe, and she was like, "I would love to cast you. You can sing great. You would crush this role, but I know that when it comes to it, you won't be able to, because the school policy was such that if you didn't have above a C average, then you couldn't perform in the play." And she was like, "I can't cast someone that I can't use on the day," and she was really upset about it. And I was like, "Wow, that sucks. Still not gonna do my homework."
Neil said the same thing to you all these years later. I had to talk with your teacher. We got to pull in a tutor.
I really want you to be. You just need to pass these tests.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, it's.
So it was entirely sort of by feel and by touch.
Yeah, and I feel like
you're a very inquisitive person, so I can see how you would learn on the job very effectively because you look around, you pay attention to what's going on around you. Some people, they need to come into it with 50 hours in the classroom or workshopping, and
I get in my head way too much about that, and.
So what would be, this is super generic, lame question, forgive me. But knowing that, what kind of advice do you give to, because you must meet sort of actors at the starting gate all the time, sure. And they probably say, what do you have to say to someone like me?
How do I get into this?
No, not that, because that's like, that's how does the business work? Okay, well
but they always is like, how do I become a voice actor? I'm like, well, first of all, you don't ever call it that.
That's the same thing with video game composer.
Yeah, you don't set out to do that. If you want to be an actor, do anything else. If you still have to do it, then do this.
But creatively, though?
Creatively, my thing is simply this. Never be rehearsed, always be prepared. And
I assume being rehearsed is like rigid and locked in, and it has to be this way because we drilled it this way.
Not even that, but just I know what I'm going to do. On this moment, on this word, I'm going to take my glasses off, and then I'll take a drink. And being a musician, for me, it was super hard for me to not feel the rhythm of the lyrics and when to drop into that big moment, and find those moments. But I was like, all of this is performance, right? Whether you're singing, you're playing, you're acting, you're writing, you're painting, it's all. I've been able now, 20 years on or whatever, to be able to distill it down to this. We are storytellers, all of us. It's in our DNA. It's in our genetics. It's why we developed language, is because we had to find a way to either say, Grog, you're never going to believe this woolly mammoth that I killed. Or
It wasn't that big.
or Oog, there's a saber-toothed tiger over there. I have to be able to convey that to you. So does that mean that I'm going to start drawing on cave walls? Maybe. And just as much as that was art, it was also communication. And I feel like the arrow has been pointing in this direction since then. And what we're doing now as storytellers, whether it be as an actor, as a composer, as a designer, as a programmer, as a shader, as a film director, as a writer, is just finding our way to tell our story.
Well, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think so to that end then, leaping, having gone from this week
Sure.
to the humble days in Dallas,
Yeah.
warping back to now, I want to hear more about your shift. I shouldn't say shift away from acting. Your broadening of your tool chest and of your palette, because it's interesting, and I want to know, like, your first sort of meaty directing experience in games was on Shadow of War, right?
Yeah.
What made you say, I need to do this? And were they hesitant to turn that over?
No. I think I actually kind of pumped the brakes more than they did, at least it felt like. Because it's always that be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly.
You might get it, and then when I actually in the meeting got it, I was like, oh wait a minute, fuck, what if I can't do this?
Yeah, on during Light in the Void, Tony and I realize, my apologies that probably no one listening to this will have any idea what that sentence meant, but on Light in the Void, we called it the Hiller conjecture, because of Independence Day, where they pitch this plan of fly the ship up, plant the virus, set off the nuke, and that's how we're going to save the world. And they go, okay, do it. And then there's that moment between the two of them go, do you know how to actually do any of that shit that you just said?
No. Do you know how to do this shit you actually just
exactly.
said?
So I know that feeling all too well. So they said to you, all right, you're on. But what made you ask to begin with?
So you get a couple titles under your belt, and then you start believing.
Which for you was 20 years ago. So now you've got 1,500 titles under your belt.
But at this point, especially after like 2013, shit changed, right?
Yeah.
So I went from being, oh, you're the guy that did Final Fantasy, to, oh yeah, I've heard a couple of things that you've been in.
Right.
To, you're in that and that and that too, to, holy shit, you're in Bioshock, The Last of Us, Arkham Origins, Modern Warfare.
I particularly
everything.
worth highlighting. I remember being especially impressed that you had the two front runner game of the years duking it out with
That was the
Bioshock
plan.
Infinite and The Last of Us. Because every now and again, composers will be like, for example, John Williams was double nominated in 1977 for the Oscar for Star Wars
And what else?
and Close Encounters.
Oh shit.
And that's happened multiple times.
Whoopsie.
1995, James Horner double nominated for Apollo 13 and Braveheart. So it's like there have been these moments
Better
where...
score, by the way, is Braveheart. Come on.
Oh, for sure, but neither of them won. What won was the Italian film Il Postino from the then
yeah.
totally unknown composer Louis Bacalov. I suspect that he
Such a
won
nerd.
because Horner had both nominations.
Just split the ticket.
I suspect that's the case, but who knows? It's happened before. But with composers, where 5-6 movies a year is, if you're established, it's not uncommon to have a pretty solid, constantly doing the next thing. And
Sure.
that Horner at his peak had 10, 11 movies coming out in a year.
But he didn't know when he signed up for them with their...
Well, that's also true. But for an actor or directors and things like that, it's often a far longer commitment.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you would have these two sort of like defining things going after each other.
I mean, my God, Ken worked on Bioshock for 5-6 years. And really, Neil and Bruce had worked on The Last of Us for about as long. We were in production We were shooting for 2.5 years, which is unheard of.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Typically, especially at that point where
that's not 10 pages a day.
No, Call of Duty, has at that point had about a 11 to 12 month, maybe 10. I think it's 10 to 12 month dev cycle. And so that was the standard. This is how long we did. So to have a game that went for 2.5 years, 3 years to 5 years, that's now commonplace.
Right.
And delay, and you early hype and then you push. But I had done enough jobs where I'm now getting like I get Infamous, Second Son, and I really have to credit Brian Fleming, who's the studio head of Sucker Punch for this, because he brought me on to postmortem after we had wrapped, and he was like, "I want to know how we can do things better." And I was like, "That's really cool of you," and I kind of give him my very probably too. I could have been kinder, and I could have been less know-it-all, because if I had asked him to go first, I probably wouldn't have said this. I said, "What about me?" He goes, "You are an incredibly powerful force." And I said, "Well, thank you." He goes, "It's not a compliment." And Brian is a no bullshit straight shooter, and he goes, "Where you're trying to insert your influence is too far down the stream, because the pages that you're trying to rewrite and change have blood on them, and you don't see that." And what I failed to recognize is that the meetings after the third meeting about that scene and the characters and how this was informed by design and was supporting mechanics and setting up this other scene that I didn't even know about, those fights had already happened.
Yeah.
And I have an idea on set when we're paying, again, $65,000 a day with 30 other people on set trying to do their job, and I have an idea. He's like, if you really want to influence, you have to do it further upstream.
Yeah.
So I said about
Pretty
at that
profound
point, Barry,
feedback, actually.
Great feedback.
Because that seems to me, it's not just, you should really be looking more at the writing and directing side if that's what's passionate about you, but that also makes you a better actor for just the regular acting jobs also, and to recognize, okay, there's a line I should try to find about where these notes start to become me just wanting to hear my own voice.
And destructive.
And or even worse, potentially disrespectful of how hard people have worked to get to that point.
And I've talked to writers. I'm fortunate enough to know some really, really good writers. And I would tell them that I was like, well, so I read the script and so we're on the day and I'm actually trying to say, well, it'd be better if we kind of change this line. They're like, "Oh, really? You changed the line?" I'm like, "Yeah, man." And he said, a friend of mine who's a writer said, "Unless you stared at a blank white page and a blinking cursor, shut the fuck up." Because you don't know what it's like to write fade in and to write 120 or 90 or 300 pages after that. Until you've done that, shut the fuck up. And that was another big, like, all right, I need to check my ego, because who cares if I've been in Game of the Year winners that, by the way, weren't Game of the Year winners because of me. They were Game of the Year winners because they were great games. I just happened to be in them. So I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start writing, not because I want to be a writer, but because the same guy that showed up on set and said, "Hey, mister, what does that thing do?" I've lost that spirit of learning. And I've lost that spirit of, I'm just a cog inside the wheel of the machine, right? So I started learning, and I started going, can I do this? And we're doing Shadow of Mordor, runaway success, huge. We are, to put it back into band, terminology, we were the bands that the bands were listening to, right? So we were the ones that they were like, "I want to go to their concert because they're cool," and everybody wanted us. We were the belle of the ball, And we took everything at DICE. We took every award but the very last thing. I don't think we got Game of the Year. I think somebody else got that. And
that happened with Journey at the BAFTAs.
Oh, you're like,
Journey won like 7 BAFTAs in a row, and then Game of the Year, Dishonored. And it was like,
what?
Wow, all right. That's interesting.
It was a funny moment. We're all down there. I was like, and I even said, I was like, bring us home, boys. And it was like Call of Duty. Or like, what? It was so much fun. But, DePlatter was walking away from that with, it's like, I can't carry this. I had to get the valet to come up and a bellman to help me take away the rest of these trophies.
Yeah.
Star Trekian obelisks that they are.
For real.
So we go to, we know that we're doing a sequel, and they bring me in and they were like, we want to talk to you about kind of like, you're our guy, right? You're our Italian. So we want to kind of walk through what we see as the vision for this next one and where we're going. And they had this huge whiteboard behind them they brought me up to Seattle, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching them do this. And in my back pocket, I'm going, am I going to ask the question that I walked into this meeting to ask? And I'm listening to them, and they're showing me the whiteboard, and they go, so we have this and we have this, and this is where we're going. And so Italian now becomes this, and this is his arc, but now we have these new characters, and this is the conflict of Celebrimbor. But mechanically, I know you understand this as a gamer, this is what we're actually going to be able to do. We're going to open up the world and be able to do these things. And I'm sitting back and I'm going, okay. And then they start talking about directors. So like, we're not going to be using Christian for this one. We want to bring in a different voice for this one. So we have our list. And I was like, please go on. Who do you have on your list? And they're like, well, there's so-and-so, and they did an episode of Breaking Bad. And there's so-and-so, and they just did 3 episodes of Vikings, which we love Vikings. I was like, I love Vikings. It's great. Oh my gosh, which one? It's like, oh, these have Blood Eagle. Oh, great. Going through this. I went to TV and film. It's where you want to go. It's like, yeah, we really want this to have a cinematic feel. I'm like, okay. I mean, the thing about a TV and film director is they really come in with kind of like their own vision. I'm like, right? I'm like, look at the whiteboard behind you, man. You've got your vision. You don't need someone to cast vision for you. You don't need a coach. You need a quarterback. That may be, in the entirety of my life, the only time that I had ever made not only an astute, but any kind of sport analogy.
So you actually said those words?
Yeah, to a bunch of Seahawk fans. And they went, oh, man. Right, but I mean, a quarterback is they're a player. I went, oh, huh. And I let them say it, and I just shut up. And they went, well, would you be interested in doing them? I mean, you're kind of the quarterback of this thing. And I went, well, guys, I don't know. So I never actually asked. I just let it hang in the air.
That's so funny. There's always this idea of like, how do you collaborate with people? And the cynical answer to that is always, you make sure that they feel like everything was their idea.
Yeah, your idea was
and
theirs.
To me, there's a certain kind of evil manipulativeness to that, where because it's like it's just ego stroking. It's not, but I love how this basically
I don't think it's
is
ego
like
stroking.
the authentic, at least by my read, it sounds like the authentic version of that, where it's like you were kind of not wanting to put your foot in your mouth almost.
Look,
but it was all funneling in the same direction.
If they were against the idea, they wouldn't have thought of it, right? If they didn't like the idea or didn't think it was a good idea, they wouldn't have thought of it. They would have been like, it's like, should we hold our breath underwater for 10 minutes? They never would have done that. So there was a part of them that was like, all right, well, maybe this is a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Who do we look at? I was like, I mean, you've got Liam O'Brien is the director. And they're like, okay. And then it finally came, I was like, what if you do? I was like, well, hold on. Why don't we do this? Why don't we date before we get married? And let's come and do a test shoot. And so we did a test shoot, and I learned a lot.
Sounds like that was a difficult experience.
It was a difficult experience. My hardest day, actually, my most challenging day on set was the day that I thought was going to be the easiest because of who I had on set. Laura Bailey, who played Eltariel, or Blade, the Blade of Galadriel, if you're into the whole brevity thing. Dear friend, worked with her countless times. We've been co-stars. I mean, we've vacationed together. I know how Laura operates, or I thought I did. There's a really, really big scene, and we're setting it up, and it's just me, Alistair Duncan, who's a brilliant actor, and a dear. He's just a good dude. It's Alistair, me, and Laura. We're sitting there and we're rehearsing, and it's not clicking. And I'm off to the side, and I'm looking at my script and my notes, and I look and I see them. They're like, well, what if we did this? And all of a sudden, they're doing what I did, which was, let's change the script up and let's change this. And they're self-directing. They're going back and they're watching playback. And it was this beautiful day. And Neil happened to be on set that day.
Just visiting?
Yeah, I had wanted him to come. I was like, come, I want you to be proud of me. It's like, hey, Dad, come watch my Pee Wee game. And he's just sitting back there. And the bastard, I walked over to him and I was like, can you believe this shit, man? Do you see what's happening right now? And he's just sitting there, looking at me, he was like, what's going on? And I was like, I mean, I am asking, because Neil's whole thing is like, what do you think you're feeling right now? What is Joel wanting in this situation? Like, and he would always ask you a question. Yeah. And he would always walk up to you and go, question. And he would ask you a question about your character. And you're like, holy shit, that's right. And so I was like, I'm asking them questions. I was like, are you listening to their answers? And I went, and he said, if you're asking them a question when you already have the answer, then you might not ask the question at all.
Yeah.
And I went, you're absolutely right. So I walked over to Laura, and I purposefully used words that when Neil and I have had 3 arguments, I think, ever in our relationship. And they've been big ones, but they've been worthy conversations. And where we've gotten through on the other side with that discourse has always made us better people, actor, director, and the game has been better for it. But Neil, famously, now because of the Grounded documentary, after we did the Sarah scene, and it was the second time we had shot it, he asked me, he walks up after we had done it like 3 or 4 times, and he was like, I'm picking up on some resistance. And I was like, you're damn right picking up some resistance, because we've shot this already. I've given you the best take. It was the first take. You should have stuck with that. And now you're wasting everybody else's time, my time, to just, fart around and try to give yourself a better version when you already have it. Go back and watch the documentary. It's a fantastic moment. So I intentionally walk over to Laura and I said, I'm picking up on some resistance. And she laughed. And she was like, yeah, you're asking me how I feel. I was like, yeah, I'm wanting to know. She was like, I don't want to tell you how I feel. I don't want to reveal that. That's not the way that I work. I want you to tell me, I need your character to go from point A to point B and let me figure it out and show you what I'm feeling. But I don't want to tell you how I feel. And I went, you're absolutely right. And in that moment is when I first started becoming a director. And I was so eat up with making sure that everybody on that set, from the actors to the producers to the writer to cameraman, everybody knew that I was the director, that I had that position. And I didn't realize that it wasn't title that gave me the authority, but it was true leadership. And that the only reason why people call you the leader is if they're following you. Otherwise, You're just a tyrant. And now, if I could go back, and I had a really good postmortem with the guys from Monolith, and it was a really good, we hugged it out. And I thanked them for the opportunity, because they basically gave me my film school.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot, but I learned that if I'm truly directing, nobody should know what my role is.
Interesting.
Because you should walk onto a set and just see everybody doing their jobs. And then somewhere in the back is somebody standing there with a cup of coffee, looking very relaxed and enjoying watching their vision being duplicated and all these other people feeling like it's their vision that they're executing.
It sounds like if you're asking Laura, tell me how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And that's part of what had worked between you and Neil.
Sure.
Does that mean he would never cast her because there would be an automatic disconnect in their approach, or would he change his approach to optimize her?
Yeah.
So does that mean...
That's what makes Neil a good director, great director. To check my answer, he goes, oh, wow. And he would intuitively understand that about Laura by throwing out a couple of tests and going, oh, so you don't like to be asked how you felt. Okay, so with Laura, I'm going to do this. And he's like a good parent. He understands that one child needs this to feel loved and the other child needs this to feel loved. And so I love this child completely differently than I love this child so that both of them feel loved.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting having gotten a little glimpse of this in our little escapade now into the realm of video game musicals and getting to watch you direct what we've done so far on that. It was amazing because even within watching you direct Nolan versus direct, can I announce that?
Sure.
I guess it's all prototype still. Who doubts that Nolan's in anything anyway?
It's a pretty safe assumption that somehow Nolan's going to be involved.
Watching you direct him versus Mary versus Laura, like, and even yourself in the few little lines that you did,
or the team, because there's that. The thing about in a game is that directing is happening bidirectional on both sides of the glass, especially when it's in a booth. Because what I need to make sure is, like, there was a great moment where everybody really wants to be involved, especially when you're dealing with the lead and you're trying to make sure that Laura fully understands, and you've got a lot of voices that can come in. And I've been on that side when you have somebody on Skype and somebody in the booth and you got your headphones on and you're looking at the script and you want to make sure that we brought Laura in. There was no audition. It was like, you're who we want, go in there, you know you're going to knock it out of the park, and you automatically want to make sure that you deliver. So that plays to all insecurities. And you've got a lot of people that are giving you a lot of information and all start sounding different and conflicting.
Yeah.
And to be able to look to our team and go, let me just funnel everything through me.
Yeah.
That's not me saying I need to be the director. It's just me going, on other ones, I'd be like, whoever's got the best information, go for it.
Well, and I think that's relevant to the actor that you're talking
100%.
to. Because I could see the difference with some, you would say things in very abstract ways and let them digest it and make it whatever.
Sure.
And then with others, like, we're tracking songs that are interwoven with performance. And then there were a couple where I'm trying to remember who it was. They basically said, sing it for me. Yeah. And you were like, it goes like this. And they went, that's interesting. And then ran with it. And then we looked at each other after the take and we're like, fuck, where'd that come from? Because they weren't miming you, but you just sort of gave them what they need. And it's very educational to watch, even within the incredibly narrow scope of what that was, the way that things were so catered towards the different actors. And I think maybe that's hopefully a sign of the maturing of the game industry in general, that those kinds of practices are becoming more and more normal, and actors are being able to be actors and perform as they have for the last few hundred years.
I think, again, it goes back to this. Acting is acting, and we're all just here telling a story. So whether that be in a musical, whether that be in a film, a TV show, a platformer, like Inside winning Best Narrative because it was the best story of the year. We're all telling a story. So I don't believe that our industry needs to finally be recognized for anything, because we do what we do because otherwise our heads would explode, and we're here telling a story. I learned the hard way. I don't need any accolades. I don't need any recognition. What I do want is to know that, as a dear friend once told me, that when my last breath is expelled, that I leave this world exhausted, and that the story that I have told is one worth telling.
Well, I'm not going to be able to end this on a better note than that. It's funny because there's plenty more I would love to ask about, but stories well told know when to end. And so I think with that, I will let that percolate and digest with folks. And I'll just say, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.